Good afternoon, LEC community. Welcome to another edition of our LEC virtual chats with Latinx leaders. My name is Edgar Palacios. I'm the founder of the Latinx Education Collaborative. I'm here with my partner in purpose, also partner in crime, I'll say this time around, Susana. How are you doing today?
Hey, Edgar, I'm good. How are you?
You know, it's been a day, but I'm getting my energy back again. I'm excited because we have a phenomenal guest today with us. One of my favorite people in the entire world, I will say, Irene Caudillo from El Centro. How are you doing, Irene?
Good, I'm doing good. Thank you, Edgar. Thank you, Susanna. It's great to be here.
Thanks for joining us. I'm going to just share a quick backstory. So Irene is one of the reasons why the LEC is able to exist today in the form that it does. She was the first person that I called when I had a crazy idea about 2-3 years ago and said, hey, what are your thoughts on developing an organization that's dedicated to the support and of Latinx educators? And Irene was like, let's figure it out. And so a lot of the work and a lot of the leadership and guidance that I've received has been through Irene, and she's a phenomenal community leader. So we're just excited to hold space with her today and be in your presence, Irene. So,
hey, listen, part of what our role needs to be is, I think I say this quite a bit, is who are we going to bring with us? And that is what it's about in our community. We're still hitting brick walls, but there is a majority of work that needs to be done, particularly for my kids and my grandkids. And you came at a time when I think about my schooling and I think about what I missed because of these boxes we had to be put in and how we were identified. And things are changing with the Latino community. And so now I not only wanted to support it, there was everything in the world that El Centro needed to do to be behind this. So happy to be here and happy to support both of you in this endeavor, and we'll be with you throughout your journey as well.
I appreciate that, Irene. So let's get to the good stuff. Let's get to the conversations of what people are here for.
Okay.
Just tell us a little bit about your own journey. So where did you begin? How did your life begin?
So, the interesting part about how most of us think about our journey starts with our birth. I have thought long and hard about how I got here and the road that it has taken me. But I also know that I stand on the shoulders of giants. So I have to pay homage and respect to my grandparents on both sides, my mother's parents and my father's parents, who one coming from Leon, Mexico, the other from Tahuantinsuyo, in a venture that said this country was going to produce an Irene Caudillo, right? Yeah. With an opportunity. And I think those journeys taken to the border at that time, my parents talked a lot about the, taxes on each head to come in and to go out. But actually, both of my parents were born here in this country. So my father's family landed in Ellsworth, Kansas, and my mother's family landed in Kansas City, Kansas. It was actually in the Argentine district when my father's family moved that they married, and I come from a family of 9, 5 brothers and 3 sisters. And one of the things that I can tell you about being raised in a household where my father worked the railroad, my mother stayed at home raising the kids and had a lot of work, of course, to do. One of the things I heard very early on from a young age was that my kids are getting a high school degree. And my parents, interesting enough, said that because my mother didn't get out of primary school. She actually lost her father early and ended up raising her brothers because she was the only girl in the family. So she learned pretty quickly that it was, raising a family, kitchen, until she decided she wanted to come to, back home to Kansas, and really couldn't get back into school. So that was kind of her path, was that she would be raise family, housekeeper. My father worked the railroad, veteran of World War II, loved this country like nothing, like all the American kind of pride that he had, but he had to drop out in 11th grade to help work for the family. And all they wanted were high school degrees until my older brother, the oldest, decided he was going to college. And my parents, who didn't understand college, but said, guess what? You, which I'm the youngest in the 9, or one of the youngest, I have a twin sister, one of the youngest said, you're not only going to college, you're getting a graduate degree. And that vision of not only do I want them to get what I didn't have, became a real important, or instilled in a young age, that education was going to be what no one could take away from you and what could help you really build more than what we could ever have. So it was a struggle. What people don't know is that though they landed in Argentine side of, on the Kansas side, it was around 6 months after my birth, or with my twin sister, that they moved to Kansas City, Missouri. But the interesting thing was, it was not to the west side. It was not to the northeast area. It was on the east side. It was just one block east of Paseo on 35th Street, predominantly African-American community, where we were probably a handful of Latino families. Great environment. Don't deny I loved my childhood. It started to be complex when it was middle school, high school, and then all of a sudden a culture shock with the University of Missouri and Columbia freshman year, and there were hardly any people of color. And then coming back to UMKC for graduate school, and then realizing I needed some identity with a community that I felt so distant from. We had it within the 4 walls of our home. Mother spoke Spanish, nothing but Spanish. They loved, putting the music on when we were cleaning on Saturdays, and everything about the culture had to be somewhat in those 4 walls. And yet, there was some yearning after graduate school that helped me really kind of get to El Centro. Most people don't realize my first job was with El Centro back in, do I have to say it?
No, not at all.
Back when I actually was hired by El Centro to open up the Academy for Children, which is our dual language preschool. At that time, of course, it was Child Care Center. I was the first director, and then had a program. I was also volunteering with a lot of places like Mattie Rhodes and Cabot Westside Clinic, in a way just to feel a sense of belonging and a sense of our communities and what they were really, how to become a proud member, as well as, ever since then, it's just been kind of different. I worked with the Kansas City, Missouri Health Department as a minority health outreach worker. That's when we were really taking a look at the disparities, using data to really confirm it. Spent some time at Youth Opportunities Unlimited, Catholic Charities in Northeast Kansas, and Swope Health Services before, ta-da, I make a full circle. So journey was tough. There were bumps in the road, and I feel like it's been a great journey. I wouldn't change anything. I've learned a lot, bumped my head a lot, but it was all for, I think, getting me ready for where I am today, and I appreciated every opportunity.
I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your journey with us, Irene. That's it's always great to hear and see leaders become vulnerable and share their past and their history, and also admit that it wasn't easy and that you bumped your head along the way.
Always.
Before I follow up with those questions on those bumps, I want to just bring into the community Fatima. Thank you much for watching us. Delia Delia Perez says, hi, Irene. And of course, Fatima again goes, la admiramos. So we admire you. And look who it is, it's Juan Rangel.
Yeah.
Irene. Don't
My
we all?
friend.
So it's clear your story and your who you are resonates with lots of people in our community. So we love you, Irene.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's the stories. I will tell you the one thing about journeys and stories that's what makes us all the more vulnerable, but all the more humanizing, especially a community that's been so dehumanized and identified in ways from the highest powerful place in this country. That man who lives in the White House, I will not identify him any other way, has done nothing more than add more anxiety and fear. And this is probably the best time for El Centro to, one, be a stronger voice and to really make sure that we are supportive to our population, particularly as I think about the way my grandparents came into this country and why, because it all matters, and we matter as a population continuing to grow and really build on the momentum of what this country's all about.
So many questions. I'm gonna pivot to a little bit. So we're in a new environment, and before I do, just a quick shout out to Jessica. Thanks for joining us. We're in a new environment, and to your point, like there is a huge need for El Centro right now to take the lead and to lead on some of these issues. What's keeping you up at night? What are some of the bigger concerns that you have during this time?
What keeps, I think, me up at night in particular is not, and I think this might be for everybody, we just don't know what's going to happen. We don't have a vaccine. We don't know, whether it's a second wave. We don't know when things are going to open back up or if it's the right time. What I will tell you first and foremost, Kansas City really we are one of the most generous communities I have been a part of. And so early on, when we talked about all of this stimulus checks and unemployment and, how people were going to get money in their pockets, it was very obvious some of the people that we serve were not going to see that benefit. It was loud and clear that the administration was going to force some of our DACA students to our undocumented families to not see any of that support. So early on, we decided that having to move away from face-to-face and education and workshops and those type of things, we still wanted a way to communicate with particularly those we serve in the population, to one, get the right message out in the language that they know in a culturally relevant way, and also support, keeping up with some of the foods that they eat. So our food distribution is much different than Harvester's food distribution, though we want our families to be supported by there as well. We wanted to make sure some of our fruits and vegetables and sopas and really rice and beans and some of those things that are very relevant for our communities to be supported. So we worked with our Latino markets to make sure that we were trying to help support with food so that their monies can go to pay rent and utilities. That these stimulus checks were also supposed to help support our unemployment support. So what we wanted to do was to make sure that we were asking for support from our community to not only bring people, because we have partners that have been great. They're not going to evict, they're not going to shut off populations, but that doesn't mean people shouldn't pay. And one of the things we didn't want to create was a population or at least people in our community to come at the end of all of this and say, okay, but here's my big bill, and we couldn't support them. So we're helping to bring people, that are already behind on some of their utility and rent assistance, bring them up to a whole, where they're not going to, after all of this, see cutoffs. And then we also wanted to make sure we were giving the right information. And now we're pushing for testing, to make sure, but we're also advocating. And one of the things that we did was partner up with Health Forward Foundation and the Urban League to really get the governors to make sure that they understand there's an urgency behind testing a population that's being impacted the most in our African American and Latino communities. And we knew social determinants of health were impacting. This only just highlighted. So we're also doing advocacy and making sure that we're getting more testing in our communities. We're advocating to make sure that our community is not, particularly communities that we serve in Wyandotte and Johnson counties, are not going to be left behind throughout any of this, and that they know we're going to be here to support them. And we're still doing a lot of other stuff. We're still doing insurance, helping with those that have been laid off. Also unemployment benefits if our families are eligible. We're helping and then making sure that if you're eligible, let's sign up for SNAP. That's another great to help with hunger and food resources in our community. So I think what we did early on was listen, which I think we do all the time. I think one of the things I can tell you is that El Centro is always listening to our community, and really then having a great staff that put it in action and said, this is what we need to do. Irene, find me the resources. And putting those two dynamics together has caused us to do food distribution on Thursdays, a whole lot of social media in a primary language, or I should say a more preferred language in some of our communities as well, so that we make sure. And then if I begin to list all of our partners, I know I'm going to miss someone, but here's what I want to say. Our funding community is working with us. Our media, from Univision to La Mega, has been phenomenal. And then I can't say enough about my staff who are sometimes internalizing. So I got to be careful about compassion fatigue, but really pushing me to make sure that we answer and are responsive to what people are feeling within our community. Yeah. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to see an organization like yours. I think in our landscape, you're seeing a lot of things happen, right? Some folks are at a standstill. They don't know how to move forward during the space. And so there's some analysis paralysis, some decision paralysis that's happening in how to best move forward. And there are the organizations like yours who are saying, this is an environment that is new to us, but it's not unfamiliar altogether. And we're here doubling down on our mission. And so that silence is also of an appreciation of the work that you're doing and the coordination behind all that work. To your point, the compassion fatigue that comes along with that, because the people who are in these spaces are folks who absolutely love their communities.
Right.
So they're of the community as well. And so, some of these issues are directly impacting them as well. Just quickly want to bring in Eva into the conversation. Everything is keeping me up at night. Eva, sorry to hear that. And, we're here for you. Fatima is also agreeing to your amazing work and the great work that you're doing. And we have a question for you. Is El Centro assisting families with unemployment applications?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. There's a number of our intake specialists who know how to work through and process that. You can contact us at 913-677-0100.
You said 913-677-0100?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll make that put it in the comments.
And that's probably one of the most critical pieces, is that we can do a lot of this. The tough part is, we love Secretary of Labor Garcia in Kansas at the Capitol. But of course, remember what they were going through with the numbers and the antiquated systems. And the tough part is, when they call us and go, but I haven't heard it. What happened? So sometimes we have to make sure that, we don't set ourselves up to, to say, oh, you're going to get this tomorrow, and then all of this happens in a way that our communities who are suffering and who are needing, particularly during this time, not, make sure that we're continuing to really follow them through the process. And so it's been a long learning, as well as kind of working with systems that just aren't ready for this.
Mm-hmm.
Irene, I have a question. You've spoken quite a bit about listening to the community that you're a part of. What have you used as your mode of gaining this data to know what your community needs? So how are you listening? Are people coming in? Are people making phone calls? What does that look like for you right now?
So it definitely looks different. I will tell you, our offices are closed to the general public, but there are appointments still being made. So I will say we are taking every precaution to make sure that our staff is well equipped, along with helping our community also know they should be wearing masks, gloves. They should also be just as, but we are still maintaining appointments, but it's different. A lot of our communication is done through telephone. We have seen a vast amount more of questions come through Facebook. So because we're utilizing the social media, but what I will tell you is we're in constant communication with the families of the kids in the preschool, and those that we know have been our clients for a while. We have that information, and then utilizing our social media like never before. So, I mean, I think a large portion of the communication to get people information comes through that platform on Facebook, and then actually generates coming in. We're also, what I will tell you is we took a unique approach, and if you know, again, to name all of our staff, if I name one, I got to name them all, right? But I will tell you the uniqueness and the creativity coming from some of our staff, because we're also in the middle, think about it, we're also in the middle of census, which is a huge, important for our population to understand. It's times like this that make us know the importance of filling out your census. And so we're in the middle of census. We're going to be going into elections. So now should have been the time. We were door knocking. We were doing a lot of canvassing around getting some of that information out. And of course, we've had to pull back. But the staff is so creative and unique. And what they did was call our friends at La Mega. And last Saturday and this Saturday, there are, of course, census tracts we knew that we were going to have to be involved in. They used La Mega's, the big megaphone and van to go out and just give quick, important messages about the census. It's important to fill out and to call this number, and we'll be able to help you. Now, we got a lot of calls. The difficult part was some people said, well, I called and you didn't answer, which was Saturday. So we realized there was something about making sure we have to do the Monday through Friday. But we're still kind of working through the best way to do that. We're still pushing. I mean, there are times when we really do have to push for testing, that we're having to push for it to be in the Spanish language. The health departments are of course, hiring people now that are bilingual for some of that kind of, when what they're doing is once someone has been identified positive, they're going to have to do some mapping around who they've come in contact with. Well, that language is going to be important. So instead of using the telephone, they're hiring folks. And so we're seeing at least kind of a better opportunity to serve a population who is dealing with this, and also not look at those barriers of language and culture, and really kind of move forward in a way that meets the need. So it's a lot. It's really, we're trying to be as creative as possible. So if anybody else has, we're using Zoom for our preschool kids, using Zoom for our staff meetings, anything possible to get the message out. We're working on it.
I'm going to ask you about Zoom for preschool kids here in a minute. But,
I was just going to say, Edgar said that he'd like to teach preschool. So tell us.
Actually, you'd have to talk to Dr. Amanda Vega, who is our director over at she's actually doing a kind of a dual role right now with our curriculum specialists and she has instituted, I think they did 6 to 8 yesterday, that is working out good. It's working out fine.
I'd love to sit in on one of those.
I'll make sure we connect you. So
yeah,
you can see how she's working on that.
Edgar, let's get on one of those too.
Huh? Yeah, absolutely. Like that'd be a blast. I'm excited about the opportunity. So now you're leading through an incredibly interesting time in our community, and so I think you've been well poised and well positioned to be in this time and space, and here you are. So can you actually take us back a little bit to a time where maybe back to those bumps, some of those leadership lessons that you learned the hard way and maybe the easy way as well?
I don't think there's anything easy about a leadership role. First of all, what I will say is that there are a lot of strong folks in our community who what I would say would provided me with opportunities. And I used to say a lot, I was lucky to be at that place at the right time. But, there was, and I can't remember when it was, during one presentation when a woman came up to me and she goes, us women need to stop talking about, being in the right place at the right time. You were prepared. Okay. So when we talk about the bumps and the bruises, you're never prepared, but it does prepare you for any equal, different opportunity. I struggle a lot in the early stages with, in one part, being part of a family where I had a couple of brothers, if not the whole family. My maiden name is Salazar, so I won't even mention them unless I mention all of them. But where there was plenty of times where I didn't know if someone was asking or actually providing an opportunity because I was Irene versus a Salazar that was related to Tony or Carlos or any of the rest of them. And I struggled with that. And one of the things that I pulled away from and when I got married was deciding that I was going to lose that name and move away from the name and try to make a name for myself, which then became Irene Caudillo. A lot of people know me as Irene Salazar. And the struggle I have with that is that, again, it was some of that lack of confidence and lack of ability to be able to say, hey, how do we make our path? And as people that have legacies are creating legacies around their name and around their business and around, and I struggled for a long time. And actually at UMKC, when I came back, I asked for a mentor and I wanted a Latina, someone who could help me kind of benefit from this identity. Struggled coming from, and I think some people will not believe this, but my family does know this. I was I was at that point very angry and very, I wouldn't say outspoken in a way that talks about in a good way and as an advocate or whatever. I was just downright mean. Okay. I was mad at the whole world. And then I realized that wasn't the approach that you needed to take, one, in being at the tables, because what I learned very early on was that I can join all kinds of different Latino organizations, but where the decisions were being made for our population were not at those tables. So how was I going to fight, regardless of the Salazar Caudillo name or whatever it was? How am I going to fight where it's not because I'm Latina, or not the only Latina, but that we had to be voices that were so important at the table? And I began to start taking everything I could find and not thinking about who else could be at the table, right? So it was okay for them to think of an Irene Salazar, Irene Caudillo, or Ramon Murguia, and then not realize that, wait, you can't be, one, the only name, and two, it wasn't about a name. It was about what you were going to actually produce at these tables to make sure that we were being a voice, and we can't be a voice for everybody, right? But we shouldn't be the only one. So I began to really push my staff. I push anyone that's Latina, and I'll say, hey, listen, what about this board? Or what are you interested in? Worked with UMKC to kind of create Ana Valdez and I worked with Dr. Renz to, help support giving training and giving opportunities for Latinos to be at the tables of these, big association organizations. And but now we need to push harder. And I think the bumps I've had are, I always say yes, everything. But everything, everything interests me. But I'm now trying to be as really serious about making sure that if there's a right fit and if there's some good folks, that we're sending out names. And I say this all the time. I now say, I can't do this, but I got some great folks that I can, pass along. There's some organizations that will vet and go, it's probably not the name, but there's other organizations that have said, we need as many good folks that are interested based on the topic. So I would tell you my bumps have been around culture. It's been around language. For all of you out there, I am not bilingual. I wish I was bilingual. I was raised in a household where my mom spoke Spanish to us, and we spoke back in English as much as she was trying to learn English. And we, of course, know Spanish. I can do as much as I can, but not as much. And that's not been a crutch. It's been sometimes complicated, to say the least. But I don't want our kids to feel that way. I don't want my kids or grandkids to feel that is. So those bumps in the road for me were culture shocks, were having to fight systems that cause us, the impact and frustrations we have today. And really a need for me sometimes to step back and realize how important it is for all of us to think about, again, who are we bringing with us? And what are we building in our legacy that says America is not defined by a white Protestant male affluent, but that Garcia and Caudillo and Hernandez become the important building blocks to also being identified as American. Because if I'm asked one thing, it is, do you speak English? Even before someone kind of, do you speak English? And where do you come from? No. I mean, where do you really come from, right? And, those should not be, as a second generation, and there's many Latinos that are fifth, sixth, 10th generations. When you look in the southern or actually out in the west part of our state, to know that we've been here a long time. And we're growing.
That's a key point right there, that we're continuing to grow. Before we move on to that conversation, just part of your legacy, Deanna. Hi, Irene. So excited to see you here. Thank you for all you have done and continue to do for me, Latino Arts Foundation, and all of our communities. Hope to see you on many, many more streaming outlets. We need your voice.
Yeah, we need all of our voices in today's environment. And I'm not sure I answered your question per se, but I do want to say that as we move forward, the important part about building a base and building a community that respects where we've come from and where we want to go means that we've got to build up all of our voices, because there's people being left behind.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that sentiment so much. And I think you did answer the question. I think what's really interesting and something that we sometimes don't actually talk about is the complexity of the Latino identity, right? Mm-hmm. Where we come from, when we got here, what we speak, what we don't speak, what we look like, what we don't look like. And, that's based in history, I believe. That's based in around the term of Hispanic and Latino and Latinx and all these other questions around identity.
Right.
So absolutely, I think as a leader, you have to encounter all these presuppositions on who you are and what you belong to, and then you have to find your own voice and lead from that perspective as well. And so something that you mentioned around not being bilingual, that is a pain point for a lot of our community, because in order to, and some of our parents made decisions in order to assimilate and to try to fit in, we would not speak Spanish. And some of our parents were like, forget about that, we're going to learn that. And so there's a lot of trauma centered around that as well. And so, and to be fair, a lot of people may use that as a check the box in terms of like, how Latino are you? Are you Latino enough in these spaces? And
that's
so,
right. And
so
I had plenty to fight about. I mean, I had plenty to fight with, particularly relatives in the Argentine. I mean, my parents, of course, came from Argentine, and I'm on the Missouri side, predominant African-American community, and there was no box because I was darker skinned. I didn't speak Spanish. There was everything against, even within my family, that was very tough to have to, kind of fend off. I think about college, the welcoming and the opening door actually came from the African-American sororities and fraternities. I didn't know anything about sororities and fraternities in college, nor was I even kind of thinking about it. But there's a huge, I remember it like it was yesterday, where I had a roommate who actually pledged and got in and invited me to to Greek Town, to a party. And I didn't get one foot in the door before basically they told me I wasn't welcome there. And still have an ill feeling where, sometimes I think that how much it has changed, because we've got Latino sororities and fraternities that can kind of help with that. But yeah, there was always times when I was going, it wasn't me checking off boxes. It was me trying to figure out where the heck box, am I supposed to be in? And on college campuses, when there are very limited number of us in the mid 80s, I'll tell you, it was very difficult to feel where, I did not know where to process myself or where I fit in, because no one was going to help. That was for sure. Even some of the administration was not helpful as well.
I'll mention that I've heard in a lot of conversations that Latinos, a turning point for a lot of Latinos' identities is in university, is in college. I know growing up here in Northeast, all of my friends pretty much knew Spanish. And it was known that the parents were trying to make sure we all knew Spanish. So for so long, I held this bias about Latinos that didn't know Spanish. And then I went to college and I was like, wait a second, there's so much history rooted in why language was weaponized, right? Why why skin color was weaponized, and why all these things that as kids in Northeast or really just in our neighborhoods just kind of function as we do, and then university or the research or your experiences with people. You talked about the Black sororities and fraternities. For us, as a founder of SLG at UMKC, the Black sororities and fraternities were the ones who welcomed us and said, yeah, we know we need this at the UMKC campus. And so to expand your horizons by going to college and universities, it's almost kind of like a, what's that called? Like I can't think of the term right now, but just like awakening and university and college being like, oh, there's a lot of history behind this. And it's so interesting to be in that situation and then evaluating and analyzing yourself and your family and your upbringing. And that's not an easy thing to do.
No, not at all. I mean, it's very difficult. You see these waves in our family where the older three were in Catholic school, and the priest and nun came and actually told my mother not to speak Spanish to them. And she said for years, she didn't even talk to her kids, that she would have to tell my father to what she needed or wanted to talk to them. I swore that when I came to El Centro, one of the first things I took a look at was how do we look at trying to sustain a population whose primary language was Spanish, because about 70% of the kids that come into the Academy for Children has nothing to do with their status, has everything to do with being raised in families where either it's preferred or primary language is Spanish. And so for the past, it's been 7 years since I've been here, 6 or 7 years, the dual language piece became more and more important, because who the biggest fighters were against us doing this, or I say not against, but who challenged us the most were the parents, because the parents wanted their kids to know English and to be ready for kindergarten, even with the thought that it could be lost. So if we were on a parallel track to turn our facility into Spanish first, so everything is Spanish is always the first thing that you see, not just an English word and then Spanish on the bottom. Every material that we purchase is like that. It's an English word and then it's in Spanish. Well, we do some things to change that in a way that they see the culture and the facilities as an important part of not who we are, but who we are, including the parents and kids as a community. And I thought that was really important, because if we can take the parents along with us, not to teach them to be first teachers, I think that's what our original thought was, but to really help them understand that we're gonna teach them English. That's gonna be something but we want to teach them some numeracy and literacy in their primary language, and we want you to help them maintain it. So we want you to continue to read to them in Spanish and to speak Spanish and to feel good about, we're going to do that here. We want you to continue to do that at home, because something happens along the way. We get so, 2016 happened. And this whole thing about English as our primary language, this whole thing about, how we've been identified, I think the more that pushed me into saying, you know what, our community is not going to feel that way at El Centro, and our parents are going to hear the language and feel the culture and love the colors. And what I hope is that we've created an environment, and this is again part of our staff's, really thought that we've always been a welcoming center. But visually, they helped us actually become a center that really just builds on that and shares that of anyone that comes in our door, and not have to ask. You should never have to ask, do we speak Spanish? Because that's the first thing that they see, and it's the first thing you hear when you're on the phone. We don't do, if you Spanish, press 2. That's not what we do here at El Centro. And I think that was what it was about coming here was, if there's something that we can do with our community, it's at El Centro, we're not gonna make them not feel part of the community and belonging, because that's sometimes what we create in some of our generations by saying and making us feel so much different, but yet we're so unique and different regardless. We can't harp on it with each other.
Irene, I have a follow-up question on, I guess, coalition building. And, you talk about El Centro being a welcoming space. But there's this tension, I think, in the Latino community around 2016 and the guy in the house. And so that not everybody, some folks are supportive of the guy in the White House. And so from your leadership perspective, how do you build relationships with those folks? How do you, make sure that their voices are heard? But how do you navigate that environment?
Yeah, it is a tough environment to navigate when, we all can't support the same candidate, right? And there are reasons why some people support him. Some it's religious, and they've only got one issue, and that what was supporting a candidate. Others that they believe, that they might be Latino as well, but they believe that a border's needed and all those other things. I have to point this out. We are nonpartisan. So our campaign is very much centered around making sure that people are registered to vote, educated, and vote. But we also know, and I'm not, when I think about our advocacy work in Johnson County, our advocacy work in Wyandotte County, and our advocacy work at the state, there are people that I know face to face who we're all talking to and advocating with, that we know what their kind of affiliation is. But we always have to walk into this. And this is where at the beginning, when we talked about journeys and storytelling, is so important, because I think there's also so much misinformation coming from the top, because he's, again, they've identified who they think we are, non-tax paying, free, everything's free. They're benefiting from all kinds of supports from the federal government that we know is not true, who our DACA students are. And I think one of the things we do that's really important is that telling the stories, because there's a lot of people who assume, when a DACA student was testifying, I remember the early days in particular, and even days now when we take DACA students to speak, where so many of our legislators are surprised that they have no accent, that they speak, English very well, and that they're, articulate, as some of them say. And it's insulting, number one. But number two, the only way I think we can really kind of benefit from the fact that people understand who we're talking about is also sharing those stories, and also putting the picture of a DACA student that sits next to me has somewhat the same story as many of the rest of us do, right? I just hate that it's this piece of paper that stands in the way of anyone looking at them different. So what I would say is, we don't build it around political, the political will. We have to stay away from that. But what we do is build it around the fact that, one, we're a growing population, and that growth is due to my children and you, young people. I was going to say we're young, but I can't say that anymore, who are having kids, young and having kids and having families. Migration is very small numbers because of since 2007, 2009, and especially around the state of Kansas. And so we are building the numbers. We're just not building our power. And that's what needs to change. The fact that we are growing number and could be a powerful number. Also, we need to make sure that the same way the LEC talks about having people that look like us in the classroom, it's not just the classroom. It's, of course, around the boardroom. It's around the courts. It's around the city governments, who's making the decisions. And we need to come out and realize that the power is, and everything's diverse, right? But the way we have to do it is sometimes El Centro is out front speaking. Sometimes I ask our allies to speak. It's different when an Irene Caudillo is in front of, the legislature that's predominantly white male, when I can have some of my, next to me, the Micah's from the ACLU that he's no longer there, excuse me, but or Bennett from Kansas Appleseed, who's saying the same thing, but as an ally, it
looks a little different.
It looks very different.
Yeah.
But within our community, it's a lot tougher to fight.
Yeah.
Because it's the sound bites that that are or something happened, of course, in their journey that I don't feel like it's worth the fight, because they're not helping those that we serve get anywhere. So I'd rather kind of leave that in its place. And some of those folks that we fight with. Or I shouldn't say fight with, those folks that don't feel the same way. If we let them do what they're going to do, but we're going to be in it with the population that we serve.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. It's such an important conversation to have and to continue having. Quickly from Robert Barrientos, on the matter of elections, will El Centro do a voter registration drive?
I need to call Robert. I got your message. I got a message. We sure have to. So because of this COVID-19, we are so far behind on, as I said earlier, many things. But our goal for registration is not only to register folks, but we also really push the advanced ballots and make sure people understand that in Kansas, at least, it's different in Missouri, but in Kansas, anyone could get an advanced ballot, and it's going to be really important during this election, because we just don't know how it's going to pan out. And we want to help them register. We want to help them fill that out. Now, of course, we don't fill out the bubbles with them, but what we do is we help them with who's running, links, or any opportunity to hear from folks. So normally what we do is we have rallies, and we don't necessarily give a platform to candidates. What we do is give them an opportunity to meet our community and typically kind of do that. But not knowing how things are going to pan out, we're still going to push registration, advanced ballots, and making sure people go to the polls, depending on what happens in August and November. Yeah, so we're in it. We're definitely in voter engagement. That's important to us, to build that civic engagement for populations that are eligible to vote.
And Irene, I'm going to commit to sending you an email to make sure to follow up with Robert, because I think that this is incredibly important. And so, I'm going to be...
Oh, he's already got a phone call into me, so I'm
I'm going to be his ally in this. So we are nearing our end of our conversation. So typically I hand it over to Susana to ask some final questions. And then I have a special final question to ask for you that I'm not going to put on the screen, but it's going to be special for sure.
Oh no.
That puts a lot of pressure on me because I'm like, I gotta say something good before this special question. No, Irene, I really we appreciate the work that you do and the work that El Centro does. Oftentimes I worry, right? Just like we were talking about earlier, keeping us up at night, right? I worry about who's helping people vote. And you talked about, yeah, we need teachers of color, but we need politicians of color. We need, these people. And I'm like, oh, now we have to start an organization for politicians of color. Now we have to start like that's the way my mind works. So I really am inspired and grateful when I get to speak to people like you and organizations that you work for, because it helps me feel better knowing that you are serving parts of our community that really need you and your organization and that want you and your organization to be on the front lines. And so thank you for all that you do. And voter registration, that's so important. I've thought about that a lot lately.
I will tell you, you start with people and what we found with the voter to voter that Mainstream does and helps us with is we realize that even internally, sometimes we have to start with our own and within our own families. And it's an ask that way. And that's very helpful to even also increase our population that doesn't realize how important census and voting can be.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Susanna, you mentioned that earlier on a webinar that we hosted. It was like you start with the community, and so that's just a great reiteration of that. You start with the folks that and you help move them along the journey so they can move others. All right, before I wrap up, this is from one of our special guests, Irene.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. I'm just making sure I pull up the right question. I don't want to mess this one up. What does a cow use to do math?
Wait, we don't see it.
What does a cow use to do math?
What does the cow used to do math?
Use. My accent's a little terrible.
Math.
Yeah.
That has to be a Juan question.
It can be.
Let's see. What does a cow use to do math? Udder. Let's see. Milk. I don't know. I'm not going to figure this out in the next 2 minutes.
A calculator.
That's a Juan question.
So I just want to give him a shout out. Juan is our resident. He says, when appropriate, please ask Irene. I love her laugh. What does a cow use to do math? So FYI.
He knew I would laugh at that one. He did.
Just quickly, I also want to bring in some other folks into this conversation. Delia, one of our educators, one of our members, has a question. So has El Centro partnered with KCKPS to work with parents? If so, what programs?
So, we were actually a Head Start partner prior to Family Conservancy getting them. Right now, I'm not sure, other than Smart Start, that we work with the school district on some of the TA for our teachers. I'm pretty sure some of the staff can tell much better. So I think a lot of what we're doing is being able to kind of utilize some resources. I know Dr. Miguel actually reached out not too long ago because, we haven't been as close as we have been. I would say not as much with the trans. And I hate to say that, knowing that now Randy is very much a part of the school board and they're 52% Latino population. I think we do more with the preschool components and Head Start than we've ever done kind of with the actual K through 12. We just need to be doing more. Not that we don't have the parents that we serve. I just don't think we do it in a program or a more structured manner.
Well, I appreciate you answering that. And before we wrap up, I just want to share with some additional love from our community for you. El Centro does such great work. We send lots of folks your way. Jessica, thanks for saying that. Delia, again, sending you hearts in support of the work you're doing. And Jessica, just a quick comment. I agree with Susanna. I want politicians that look like me. And let's further expand just on that a little bit. Not just that look like you, but also have similar lived experiences and I wouldn't say like-minded is the right word for that, but similar experience that can help elevate and amplify that voice. And then I see your. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, because it's not as if we don't have elected officials that support El Centro and support our community. I want to reiterate, we have some advocates at the State House, the unified government, from BPU, but there are, of course, we got Christian Ramirez who joined the UG. That's a first for a Latino in a long time. We got Randy at a school board, first elected Latino ever to the KCK school board in a 52% population. I mean, I think one of the things that we want to do is to make sure that we're electing folks that definitely understand our issues as well as understand our journeys and look like us and understand all of that. But go ahead.
And just a final question for you. So, what can we as community members do to support you and El Centro?
What I would say in a time like today is we have been kind of pointed out as kind of the worst to shelter in place. And there's many of our family members that just can't because they're continuing to work. But what I would say is that if we're going to continue to celebrate within the home, do more of the video if we can teach family members, because many folks aren't wearing the mask, aren't protecting themselves, continuing to walk and do. And so I think get the right information, or get the information and really help our community expand and understand that. And the other thing is that help with the census, and voting is coming up. So talk about those two things in a way that's important for our community and for the resources that in education, especially, that we use. And now's the time to people, to be able to ask questions and to be able to contact us so I think the community needs to really build its knowledge around that. And we've got all kinds of resources to help.
Oh, I appreciate that. And you can definitely count on us as an organization to help support you in those endeavors. And I know we've talked a little bit about how we can continue to partner and get the word out on some of the initiatives as well. Well, we are past time, as we usually are when we have conversations. So, Irene, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
You are a phenomenal leader. And we just appreciate you gracing us with your presence today. So,
thank you.
Thank you, Irene.
Right. Thank you, LEC community. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Be healthy.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.